Just kind of to start off, obviously, you've been in the aerospace industry for, decades before you came over here to the East Coast to be with Space Florida. Kind of taking it back for you as far as your origin story, what was it about the space domain that really sort of captured your attention? And, what about your time with Space Force really helped propel that interest, not just from a duty side, but also just from sort of a personal interest side?
Yeah, I know. We were talking about this in the office the other day, and I think all of us in the space business almost have some sort of origin story, like you said. A lot of it, and then a lot of them go back to when we were kids. And for me, that's exactly what it was. I was, early '80s kid who got to see one of the first space shuttles that had landed in California, was transiting back to Florida, stopped in Texas where I was living at the time. Got to see that there. Was very big into the space, world, I guess, very early on. I got some pictures of me, I think, when I was in first grade, I think it was, doing like a science fair thing with space related things. And so always was interested in the space world. And when I, went to college and ended up doing ROTC, and then ended up in the space or Air Force at the time, but in the space business and doing space operations, although it was definitely on the list, it wasn't, it was really, what was given to me. So I really lucked out in terms of aligning interests with something that I was able to go work in. And then just, the Air Force at the time, the government has really been at the forefront for so many years of driving where we're going in space. And so it was great to be part of that. And the wonderful part about that is to sit back for the last 20 years and watch, a largely government-driven space business evolve into more and more so to, I think maybe even now we can say this, a commercially driven space economy, right? And the government is getting to take advantage of that now. And so, with the advent of the Space Force was another great time in recognition of the space domain and its importance. And so the fact that those things all came together about the time I ended up retiring from the service, and then having the opportunity to pursue this position, and of course getting the pleasure to be accepted. And it's been a privilege to sit here and do this. But yeah, a lot of fortunate timing and occurrences over my career that has combined just my interest and enjoyment of the space business with my professional side. So it's been a pleasure, and I do say that I have been probably pretty lucky to be one of those people. We always talk about aligning your career with something you're really interested in, and I've been really lucky to do that over time.
Well, you mentioned being able to sort of sit back and watch the evolution of, how space has evolved, but, clearly through, like you said, with your beginnings in the Air Force, transition to the Space Force, you very much had a leadership role in that, up to, your most recent position as the commander at Vandenberg. In sort of leading the base there and sort of watching the evolution of both just the quantity, but also, as you mentioned, the quality and the makeup of how space flight was changing as sort of a paradigm. From a West Coast perspective, describe what that transition was like as you started to see more players really start to come into the mix. Obviously, SpaceX being a big one, but certainly, you've got Rocket Lab and some of the others that are really coming into the fore now.
Yeah, the dynamic is really, I think, industry-wide. I think it's probably almost agnostic as to where we were. I think we saw it on the West Coast, just like we're seeing it here on the East Coast. While I was at Vandenberg the last time, we doubled our launch rate year over year for the last 2 years, and that just matched what was happening out here on the East Coast. So I think it speaks to the overall increase in interest and market demand for space-based capabilities and services, and then of course the launch piece of that is the enabling factor that gets that even more so, helps increase the overall capacity in the market there. So yeah, we definitely saw the increase firsthand on the West Coast. It was exciting time to be out there and to watch that increase. And then, transitioning over here back to the East Coast. And that's where, when I get into the seat here at Space Florida, it's really been a pleasure to be able to work with the team here who's kind of had that front row seat in helping develop and push that acceleration here on the East Coast. And now we get a chance to really keep thinking of what comes next and what's the future look like and keep push the envelope there.
Well, and we're on the cusp of launch 67 on the year here on the East Coast. In your new capacity as the head of Space Florida, and given your experience with the Space Force, what do you think are some of the necessary steps that are going to be required for sites and space operations like here on the Eastern Range as well as the Western Range to be able to expand that launch opportunity and capability, as you have more players coming in? I mean, the 3 pads on Missile Row that are, turning over to commercial partners, obviously going to be adding into the mix with, SpaceX, and when Relativity comes back, they'll be in the fray too with Blue Origin. What are some of the sort of architecture pieces that are needing to be embellished or emboldened to make that work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a pretty broad question. I think, we're as I sit in and come into this job now and look ahead at what is probably going to be important. I think, number one, it's, we want to be here to support our partners at Patrick and Cape Canaveral, SLD 45, and of course, and then our KSC partners. They're the ones that are at the forefront of pushing launch rates and overall capacity and operations. But at some point in time, there's going to be different capacity challenges, and that's where we want to be able to make sure we have a strong partnership with them so that we can step in and enable and hopefully either augment or add to some of the services that are needed. The port is a great example of that. I don't think anyone would have thought 5-10 years ago that maritime recovery was going to be such an integral piece of the overall launch throughput challenge. And so, we see that as a really important role for Space Florida and the state at large to make sure that we're working with across all the partners to include the port and Florida Department of Transportation and others to make sure that that piece of the flow isn't constrained. And so I think we'll look at those are the types of examples, using something like what we call the launch and landing facility, the old shuttle landing facility. Taking advantage of that, which was no longer really required from KSC's perspective, and then investing in it so that as capacity needs arise, we already have the infrastructure in place to go support that. So I think our primary role is to really make sure that we, on the spaceport side or the space infrastructure, space transportation side, is we're looking far enough ahead and defining what the space transportation infrastructure across the entire state looks like, and then make those strategic investments working with our partners across the state and nationally in order to enable that and set the conditions so that if capacity challenges do arise, we're able to either augment the critical node here at Cape Canaveral or come up with other solutions that might make sense.
Well, and that was going to be my next question was, coming into this role, obviously there's a lot of different projects in various states of development across the state of Florida. How has the transition been for you coming into this role, and from your predecessor, who I believe is sort of helping in the transition through the end of the month or the end of December? I suppose we're still in November technically right now, but what's it been like sort of getting up to speed, and why was this a role that you wanted to take on?
Yeah, no, I mean, a couple things. I'll go a couple directions with that. First of all, Frank DeBello obviously is an icon when it comes to this business, and I can't say enough positive things about knowing Frank from before, and his support has been amazing, and I would really credit him for where we are right now overall. And so just to have the opportunity to get to come in behind him and it's been a pleasure, and it's really exciting. And I think, the key thing is as we kind of start to consider that future, the great thing about this job is, Florida is truly at the forefront of the space economy. And really the aerospace economy at large. And so to get to sit here in this role and help try to shape that, help think through what the future holds, how can we help? And that's really what we're about, is trying to figure out how can we best help continue to grow that ecosystem, if you will, overall. And so there are so many opportunities here in the state, between the business friendly climate that the state has and just the general support across the entire state for the space industry and the aerospace industry. It's just amazing opportunity to sit here. And so again, coming back to what I said earlier, it was just the perfect blend of interest, right? Things that I know and get excited about. An organization that is truly forward leaning and I think probably could be considered a first mover in many ways. And then just the ability to step back and still have a kind of a public service role, right? We still are working on behalf of the taxpayers here in the state of Florida to build an economic engine. And it's really truly across the state. And when you think about what I knew going into the job and what I know now, even just in a couple months, it's the far reach across the entire state, and really that holistic approach to trying to make sure that if we're talking, for example, space infrastructure capacity or space transportation capacity, that we've really Space Florida has looked at that holistically and to take advantage of all aspects across the entire state. And that's the exciting part, is that we really have an opportunity to continue to grow Space Florida as this interplanetary hub of space commerce, because, we like to say we have an unbeatable location. And that's the truth, is that there are few places in the United States, especially, and maybe even globally, where you have all those things come together, this nexus of creativity and experience, amazing toolkit, and then of course our location.
And obviously, one of the important things that you touched on, earlier in the conversation is, Space Florida is designed to really help pave the way for some of these, commercial interests to fit into the puzzle pieces that may be needed to expand the infrastructure required to keep pushing the envelope forward in Florida, like, creating some of the bandwidth for SpaceX to expand the Roberts Road site, like being able to bring in, an Amazon in their Kuiper processing facility. I guess sort of in that vein, what are some of the things that are on the near-term horizon that you yourself and Space Florida are working towards, that are some of the bigger projects that are, coming around the corner that you're excited about?
Yeah, no, there's a few things. When you look at, I mentioned the kind of holistic state approach to what we're doing and expanding spaceport territory. We have several locations across the state that are already designated as spaceport territory, and we want to expand that. And I appreciate the legislature's push, and we should see that come through the session this year, and to designate Tyndall and Homestead as two more spaceport territories. And that just really starts to give us some flexibility and I like to say optionality when we kind of consider how best to put this network, our spaceport ecosystem together. And the other thing I think is really important is, we rely so heavily, and our real success story is built off of our financial expertise and the toolkit we bring to bear, and the opportunity up in DC to see the updates to the tax code to allow for us to issue tax-exempt municipal bonds as a spaceport, just like airports and seaports and other similar entities can do. If that goes through, I think that's another incredibly powerful tool in order to provide, again, options when we start to work with these companies. And because that's the one thing that I think really comes to the fore when you consider what we do generally is, every firm, every company, every need is unique. And I really think one of the key parts of our value proposition is being able to work with every company and find that unique solution for each of them. And so some of those things, I would also add workforce in there. Workforce is incredibly important. That is one thing I've heard multiple times as I've met with our industry partners, just as in getting up to speed. And workforce is a constant drumbeat of need for talent, and Florida is producing a lot of talent. We just want to make sure we're aligning that talent with the needs of the aerospace industry as much as we possibly can.
And when you say you're looking to expand the designated spots that will have the moniker of being spaceports, like obviously the Cape and I believe Jacksonville and the airport in Titusville, would that potentially allow Florida to increase its launch capabilities, or would that be more on the side of, say, giving spaces for, return of spacecraft, or just a specific type of business that could benefit from having its, infrastructure at a specifically labeled spaceport? I guess, how are you kind of thinking about what that expansion could actually mean?
Yeah, it does a couple of things. First of all, as you just mentioned, it unlocks our toolkit, right? We have our full access to all our tools on spaceport territory. And so that gives, regardless of the type of firm or the type of activity that's going to happen there, it gives us that flexibility to be as creative as we need to be to support those long-term relationships that we're building with these companies as they come to Florida and really want to grow. So that's really the main, I think, benefit overall. But then, when you look at it again, as we start talking about kind of the master plan for the entire spaceport system across the state of Florida, which is why we also are starting to transition our thinking into just not spaceport system, but really space infrastructure. I like to keep it simple. And just when we talk about space as another mode of transportation, I think it's important to consider that our space infrastructure network here in the state of Florida includes everything on the ground, but it also includes on orbit and potentially beyond orbit down the road. So we're just going to start putting those pieces together. That offers us some flexibility. You might do, for example, engine testing. Maybe you don't want to do that at your key spaceport because you don't want to interrupt the flow of launches per se. Maybe you go somewhere else at a different part of the network to do that kind of testing, for example. We have that critical node here at Cape Canaveral, and so we want to make sure that we're building resilience for that node also at the same time. And so those are all the bits and pieces that we want to start putting together overall, and which is why that spaceport territory designation really helps us.
Gotcha. I guess you laid out a couple of different things that, are priorities for Space Florida, but in the next, say, year to 2 years, are there specific things that you want to see done or that you want to begin to tackle very specifically?
Yeah, I think that our number one thing really is just maintaining the pace of several things, and our what we call our deal flow. The companies coming into Florida and wanting to build here and partner with us and build those long-term relationships. That pace is not letting off, and I've seen it in spades here in just the first couple of months. And so, number one is just making sure we can maintain that pace and support our clients through that process. And then on top of that, we focus very heavily on building those deals and getting companies here and growing. But then we want to make sure that we're also providing that client-focused support and advocacy along the way. And so those are probably the two from just a general day-to-day business operations that are very interesting. I'm very keen on making sure that we are continuing to build and grow in that area. But then the next part, I think, in my mind, the next kind of big step is to look at the capacity of the network, the space transportation network, and define what we really think we want. In my old job and in past lives, launch rate was kind of our metric for, how fast we could, the capacity of the system. And that's still probably a decent rate, but the hard part now will be, what does the market demand in terms of rate, right? Or what is the capacity that the market is demanding? And, I don't know that we have a good answer to that, because trying to predict the market right now for space data and services and capabilities is pretty still early in that maturity. But we can start putting things toward that, trying to think through, is one launch a day the rate that we want to be able to support? Is it 2 or 3, or is it maybe not a total launch rate, but maybe it's I want to be able to support 10 in a given day, but I can do that once a month, or something like that, right? There's a flexibility in there. And obviously a lot of that falls on our partners at the Space Force and NASA. So we want to be right by their side and helping them, enabling them to be successful, specifically here on the Space Coast. But then that's when we talk about the resilience in the overall network. So that's a long way to kind of get to. We really want to define what that capacity and understand what that is. And then that allows us to build the programs and the services and make the investments in the infrastructure that we need in order to continue to build the network and then build resilience in the network. And then there also has to be a policy and regulatory piece to that because, if you look internationally and nationally, we're still in the early stages of developing policy for space commerce in general and regulations that go along with that. I think Florida, because of number one, the value of that space commerce to the state of Florida and our leadership position in that arena, I think we really want to put some good thought against what are smart regulations, smart policy that'll help, enable future growth. And then either working with the our team, federal partners or internationally come up with policies that would help support that overall. So those are kind of the general angles that we're going to be heading into in the near term.
I guess maybe without going too steeply into the weeds, are there certain policy metrics that you're, I guess, kind of keeping an eye out to make sure it doesn't go past, arbitrary line X? Or I guess sort of how are you thinking about where that outer boundary might be so that you're not, over-regulating, but you're also able to allow for an increase in launch cadence while balancing, obviously, Florida, very busy commercial airline market, and very busy maritime too. So I guess on the regulatory side, what are you kind of keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, I think, I think there's a couple of areas that we want to make sure. I think your point is correct that, we're still in the early stage of this market development, right? And I think the last thing we want to do is over-regulate to the point where it constricts the market. I think what we'll end up doing is, and this is where I've already had some good conversations with industry, where is the right investment needed? And are there things that we can do in partnership with industry to try to build the infrastructure now? And then hopefully once you've enabled the infrastructure, once the economy takes off, then we'll go back into, some what we consider kind of a normal or normalized mode of operating in a traditional, like if any other port authority or transportation network. But I think we're still pretty early in that process. There are a couple areas that I think are worth exploring. Sustainability in the economic environment in space. Things like, is debris something we want to pay attention to? I mean, it's definitely a concern. And is that something because of the overall potential impact on debris to the economic activity in space? Does Florida want to continue to just, look at ways to mitigate that and remediate that? And is that something that the state would want to take on? And so those are the kind of concepts that we're working with right now to see what makes the most sense. And of course, where, the return on the investment is.
And I guess just lastly, because you brought it up as, an important piece of all this in the workforce side, what are some of the initiatives that you're kicking around in your head and with your team as far as not only growing the prospective workforce through partnerships, I imagine, like with Florida Tech and UCF, but, also to make sure that those are retained in Florida as opposed to, going to Texas, California, other spots?
Yeah, on the retention side first, starting with that, it definitely is. I think if you build the vibrant economy here and there's options and exciting things to go do across the aerospace industry, I think you're going to draw that. We see that talent coming in here, I think, into the state from elsewhere already. So I think the intention is you start to build that economic engine and continue the flywheel, so to speak, in terms of spinning. I think you're going to continue to see interest build there. And so and the great thing is we get to take advantage of some of those great universities that you mentioned across the entire state, really. And there's definitely interest. And I've had a chance to talk with most of the university presidents at this point. And there is interest across to questions like how can we continue to ramp up to supply talent there. But I think it's also important, and I heard this a lot in this job and in past, was that highly skilled technical labor that is incredibly important to turning rockets around, for example, to launch again. That is an area that we're definitely focused on helping. And when we talk about doing things with our educational partners across the state, in terms of a master credential list that allows us to help students understand that we're going through some of these technical colleges and in secondary school, post-secondary schools. They may already be working on a degree that is very technically oriented. Let's connect that with what the space industry needs, and then again reach all the way back into schools and really show that, hey, if you don't have to be an engineer, to work in the space industry. There's so many needs right now that we want to, and that's the Space Academy approach that we're developing right now, in order to just really, like I described for myself, we all have that story where we were somehow kind of got into the space business, and really get out to the education, to the students early overall.
Well, I realize we've hit our time, so really appreciate you spending it with me, Robert, and belatedly hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and good luck to you on the rest of the year.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the time, and happy to follow up anytime.